All right, hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. And today we're going to a place where, well, let's just say people aren't exactly known for holding back.
Oh, I think I know where we're headed with this.
Yeah, we're diving headfirst into the wild world of Reddit relationship advice. Specifically, a thread where a guy found out his girlfriend kissed someone else at a bar, and, well, he turned to the internet for guidance.
It never ceases to amaze me how these online forums become like this digital arena for our anxieties about love and relationships, you know? It's like everyone's got an opinion and the internet gives them, I don't know, like this shield of anonymity to just share things they'd probably never say to someone's face.
Oh, absolutely. So let's set the scene here a little bit.
Yeah.
This guy, he posts about his girlfriend's kiss, and it's pretty clear. I mean, he's distressed. You can practically feel the hurt and confusion just like radiating from the screen as he's asking for, some kind of help. What are some of the things that stand out to you about his initial post?
Well, the original post is just raw. It's like this outpouring of emotions. You see phrases like completely lost or don't know what to do. And it really just underscores how vulnerable he is in that moment, like reaching out to, complete strangers online for support when he's going through this really intense emotional turmoil.
Yeah, definitely. So then, how does the internet, how does this giant collective of voices respond to this very vulnerable kind of plea for help?
Well, you get this incredible range of advice, to be honest. Some of it's super harsh, some of it's actually pretty insightful, and then there's a good amount of, well, dark humor sprinkled into. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really like this microcosm of how society views, I guess, infidelity and just relationship struggles in general.
Definitely. So let's start with those harsher reactions. I mean, there's a fair share of the classic dumper or run for the hills
Yeah.
comments, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You've got a pretty big chunk of commenters who, without knowing any more than, what's in that initial post, immediately jump to the conclusion that, boom, the relationship's over. It's almost like they're projecting their own experiences, their own baggage onto this guy's situation, And this tendency to just make these snap judgments based on like the tiniest sliver of information, it's really a hallmark of what we call the hive mind mentality online.
Okay, so for those of us who maybe aren't as fluent in all things internet, break that down for us a little. What exactly do we mean by hive mind mentality?
So I think of it as, how online groups, especially in places like Reddit, can just converge on a single opinion or a course of action, often without a whole lot of critical thinking, without considering like other viewpoints. It's like everyone's trying to fit in, avoid being the one who disagrees, and it creates this sort of digital echo chamber.
Interesting. And we definitely see that play out in this thread. You've got people basically saying, she kissed another guy, case closed, dump her. But you and I both know relationships are never that simple.
Right, exactly. And that's where critical thinking is so crucial. Just because you've got a bunch of people online all saying dump her, doesn't actually make it the right move for this guy.
Yeah.
Every relationship is different, and what works for one couple might be a total disaster for another.
Yeah, so true. It seems like some commenters do recognize that things are more complex, and they offer kind of a more measured response.
Thankfully, yes, it's not all doom and gloom. You have some people who really encourage the poster to talk to his girlfriend to understand the context of what happened with this kiss and try to actually work through it as a couple. They highlight how important communication is, understanding before you go and make any big decisions.
It's like those voices of reason, right? They offer a nice balance to the whole dumper chorus. I mean, there's even one comment that says, people in love don't shut down and walk away when they are hurt, they communicate. It's a nice reminder that healthy relationships are about working through those challenges, not just, hitting the eject button at the first sign of trouble.
Couldn't agree more. And I think it's encouraging to see those voices in there, pushing back against this dominant idea that it's just an automatic breakup, reminding the poster that relationships, they take effort, they take understanding.
For sure. But I think it's interesting because even some of the advice that, at first glance seems more reasonable can still be kind of riddled with problematic assumptions.
Right. Oh, absolutely. I mean, you have one commenter, for example, who suggests make her confess. And even in that wording, there's this underlying implication that the girlfriend's already guilty, like she's being deceptive and needs to confess, even though she hasn't even had a chance to explain herself. It sets up this dynamic where the poster is like interrogating her rather than having an actual conversation.
Yeah, I see that. It's almost setting him up for this confrontation, like an adversarial kind of thing,
Right.
instead of an actual dialogue. It's subtle, but It's an important distinction, and it shows how even advice that seems, I don't know, well-intentioned can still be loaded with biases.
Exactly. And this is where it becomes so crucial to really examine the assumptions underneath the advice you see online. Even if it's coming from a good place, you have to ask yourself, is this actually rooted in healthy communication and understanding? Or is it being fueled by, negativity, by this desire to punish?
Like we have to be these advice detectives, right? We have to look for those hidden motives and try to separate the genuine attempts to help from, the ones that maybe are driven by personal agendas or unresolved issues.
Precisely. We need to be so critical of the advice we encounter online. And that means asking yourself, is this advice actually helpful? Or is it just, confirming things I already believe, feeding into my existing anxieties?
That's a classic example of what psychologists call confirmation bias, right? Like that tendency we all have to favor information that supports what we already believe, even if that information is flawed or incomplete.
Exactly. Confirmation bias is like this sneaky little shortcut our brains take, and it can lead us down the wrong path, especially when we're dealing with, emotionally charged stuff like this. Being aware of that bias and, actively looking for alternative perspectives that challenge our initial assumptions, that's crucial.
Totally. So we've talked about those kind of extremes, you know, the immediate dumper reactions and the calls for more like calm communication. But then there's this whole other layer to this Reddit thread that I always find fascinating. The humor. You have so many comments like, see you at the gym, bro, or hit the gym, king. Why do you think those kinds of responses are so common in these heartbreak threads?
I think these humorous responses actually offer this really interesting window into how men in particular are often socialized to deal with emotional pain. Instead of expressing vulnerability or seeking support, they're encouraged to channel their heartbreak into like physical self-improvement.
It's almost like society saying, don't sit and wallow in your sadness. Go pump some iron and emerge from this whole thing stronger, more attractive.
Exactly. It's this very stoic approach to heartbreak, emphasizing strength and resilience, but it often ends up masking what's actually going on beneath the surface emotionally. These comments that seem lighthearted, they can actually reveal this much deeper societal issue about, what men are expected to do with their emotional pain.
It's a good reminder that even these seemingly trivial comments you see on the internet, they can actually offer insights into these broader cultural patterns and social expectations.
Absolutely. And I think that's why doing these deep dives into these online forums is so illuminating, right? They give us this glimpse into the collective psyche, this chance to explore those anxieties, the desires, the coping mechanisms that shape our relationships and ultimately our lives.
Totally. So wrapping up part one of this deep dive, we've seen the whole spectrum here, from the harsh and the judgmental to the compassionate and the insightful, all in response to this guy's plea for help. It really highlights how online advice can be this double-edged sword, right? Offering valuable support, but also potentially harmful misinformation at the same time.
And in part two, we're going to keep unpacking this thread, looking at more of the nuances in the advice and diving deeper into those psychological and societal factors that are really at play here. So stay tuned for that. Welcome back to the deep dive.
One thing that really strikes me as we dig deeper into this Reddit thread is just how many people they immediately assume the worst about the girlfriend.
It's like they're all convinced that this one kiss is just like absolute proof that she's been up to no good all along. You see so many comments like, she's totally cheating on you, or this is just the tip of the iceberg. And it's like, wow, really?
It's a classic case of confirmation bias in action.
Yeah.
That tendency we have when we already suspect someone's doing something wrong to interpret any little thing as evidence, even if there are totally innocent explanations that are way more likely.
So in this case, because she kissed someone else, some people just jump straight to serial cheater, even though there's literally nothing else to support that. Exactly. They've already got this idea in their head about infidelity and, they're looking for anything to confirm it instead of actually considering other possibilities.
It's like they're wearing these infidelity goggles and everything just gets filtered through that lens. It's a good reminder that we all have biases, and being aware of them is so important, especially when you're giving advice to someone else.
For sure. And those biases, they can have real world consequences. Imagine, reading hundreds of comments telling you your partner's cheating. That kind of social pressure can be really persuasive, even if it's based on nothing but speculation.
It makes you wonder, how much of this online advice actually ends up influencing what people do in their own lives. Are we letting these anonymous internet voices dictate our relationships?
It's a valid question. I mean, these online forums can be a great place for support and information, but at the end of the day, every relationship is unique, and advice from strangers, well, you've got to take it with a grain of salt.
I think it's interesting, too, how the advice in this thread often reflects, like, those bigger societal expectations about gender roles. We
Right.
already talked about the hit the gym comments directed at the guy.
Right. Those are perfect examples of how men are often told to, bottle up their emotions and just like channel their heartbreak into being more physically fit. That very stoic approach to dealing with pain.
But what about when it's the other way around? If a woman had posted about her boyfriend kissing someone else, are the expectations different?
Oh, absolutely. There's often this huge double standard when it comes to infidelity. Women tend to get judged way more harshly than men for doing the exact same thing.
So if it had been a woman posting about her boyfriend's kiss, we might have seen even more extreme reactions.
Very likely. You might see a lot more comments focused on her self-worth, telling her to know her value or never settle for less. There's this emphasis on women being strong and independent, which can be empowering for sure, but it can also put pressure on them to, hide their emotions and avoid seeming weak.
It's just another reminder that, this online advice, it's always being filtered through these societal norms and expectations about how men and women should behave.
And being aware of those biases is key, both when we're reading advice and when we're giving it.
Okay, so we've covered the extremes, the biases, the gender dynamics. But are there any actually good nuggets of wisdom in this thread? Anything actually helpful buried in all this chaos?
Absolutely. I mean, despite all the noise and negativity, there are definitely commenters who offer genuine insights and, try to provide a helpful perspective.
Like there's one comment that tells the guy to consider the context. They remind him that, a kiss doesn't always equal cheating. It could have been a drunken mistake, a moment of weakness, whatever. It's a good reminder that there's always more to the story than what you see on the surface.
Right. And another commenter really emphasizes communication. They tell him to talk to his girlfriend before he makes any decisions. Communication is key to resolving any relationship issue.
It's simple, but it's powerful, right? Instead of jumping to conclusions or letting strangers on the internet tell him what to do, he needs to have an honest conversation with his partner.
Exactly. Those are the kinds of comments that, really cut through the noise and offer genuine guidance. They remind us that relationships require effort, understanding, and a willingness to work through things together.
It's interesting, though, how the more nuanced, thoughtful comments often get buried under the more, I don't know, dramatic and attention-grabbing ones.
It's the nature of online forums, I guess. Extremes tend to stand out, while more level-headed perspectives often get lost in the shuffle.
Like trying to find a needle in a haystack. You've got to sift through a lot of junk to find those gems. But they're there, and they can be incredibly valuable for anyone trying to navigate the messy world of relationships.
And as we continue our exploration of this thread in part 3, we're going to take a closer look at those valuable pieces of advice and think about the bigger implications of seeking and giving guidance online.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. It's been pretty wild, right? Exploring all these different reactions to this guy's story, everything from those super harsh judgments to, some really compassionate and thoughtful advice.
Yeah, it just shows you the internet's got it all, this whole mix of opinions that really reflects how complicated relationships are and how hard it can be to deal with these kinds of situations.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious to hear, what were some of the less obvious things that stood out to you from this thread? What was particularly insightful?
One commenter, they made this observation that really stuck with me. They said something like, advice on Reddit's always going to lean towards breaking up. And
Yeah.
they basically told the guy to, keep that in mind when he's reading all these responses.
Oh, that's such a good point. It highlights this potential bias that you see in these online advice forums. There's almost this push for the most dramatic solution, even if something more, I don't know, moderate would make more sense.
It's like the internet loves extremes. It's so much easier to get attention, get people to agree with you when you're giving a bold, strong opinion, even if it's not the most well thought out advice.
So if you're someone who's looking for advice online, how do you deal with that bias? How do you separate the good stuff from the not so good stuff?
Well, I think first you have to remember that these online communities, they come with their own biases. There's often this tendency towards really simple solutions and these stories that are full of drama. So you have to approach the advice with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Like going to one of those buffets where everything looks amazing, but you know you can't try it all. You got to be careful and pick what's actually good for you.
That's a great analogy. And just like you wouldn't trust some random person on the street to tell you what to eat, you shouldn't just blindly follow every piece of advice you find online.
There was another comment that I thought was really helpful. Someone suggested that, if this guy's really struggling with his emotions, if he's having trouble figuring out what to do, he should think about talking to a professional.
That's such important advice. Sometimes these relationship problems, they're just too complicated to work through on your own or just with advice from friends or, anonymous people on the internet. A therapist can give you that safe space to process your feelings, figure out your patterns, and learn healthy ways to cope.
It's a reminder that asking for professional help, that's not a sign of weakness. It actually shows strength, that you're willing to invest in yourself, in your well-being, and get guidance from someone who really knows what they're talking about.
Exactly. And while online forums can be great for support, they shouldn't take the place of professional help when you need it.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into this Reddit relationship advice thread, what are the key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, first off, remember that online advice, it's a mixed bag. There's good stuff in there, but there's also a lot of bad information and biased opinions. Be critical, don't just believe everything you read, and try to get different perspectives.
And remember, you know yourself and your relationships better than anyone else. Don't let other people's opinions control your decisions. Trust your gut, talk to people you trust, and focus on having open, honest communication with your partner.
And if you're really struggling, don't be afraid to get professional help. There's no shame in that.
This has been such a fascinating journey into the world of Reddit relationship advice. We hope this deep dive has given you some new insights and some things to think about. Until next time, be kind to yourselves, be careful online, and take care of those relationships that matter most.